Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, Irini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum. Peace be unto you, and welcome to 2 Samuel chapter 6, in which there are 23 verses. In verse 1, we have a significant difference, talking about the young men of Israel, 70,000 versus all the chosen of Israel, 30,000. So less than half the number in the Septuagint. In verse 2, we see here rulers of Yehuda versus the Ambale of Yehuda. I think that's just a translation of rulers. What does it say here? Bale. Okay, it doesn't really give us a good description. The men. Ballet. Masters. Okay, masters or rulers. However, the distinction is not so much that it's calling them masters. It's saying they're from Ballet. So this is the name of a place. In the Septuagint, it is not the name of a place. These are individuals who are in positions of authority, rulers. There is an omission as well of on an expedition to a distant place to do what? To bring back the ark of Elohim. In verse 3, his brethren versus Ahio, an individual named Ahio. You're going to notice this again, the same difference. And there is an omission of with the ark. So they drove the wagon or the cart, not by itself, but with the ark of the covenant. Again, in verse 4, it says here, this is a redundancy in the Masoretic, but there's a continuous difference of his brethren. But in the Masoretic, it describes an individual named Ahio who went before the ark. Who is Ahio? He's nobody's. It's his brethren. Achio. Let's see that. What does that mean? Does it say his brethren? Fraternal, brotherly. So no, it doesn't say it's multiple people, only one person from the tribe of Benjamin, supposedly. Verse 5, there's an omission of well-tuned instruments. So they played, Dawid and the children of Israel played before Adonai on well-tuned instruments mightily, with all their might, with all their skill, with all their effort. But in the Masoretic, it is not worded this way. It says, played before Adonai on all manner of instruments of fir wood. So there is no description of how they played. Did they play with a lot of heart, a lot of might? No. In verse 5, continuing on, it omits that they played songs. They played songs, which means they were not just random, they were not simply random noises, or that they were improvising songs on the spot. These were songs that probably, most likely, were well known among the people of Israel. Verse 6, talking about Uzzah, who reached forth his hand to the ark of Elohim. Why? To keep it steady. This detail is omitted from the Masoretic. Now, using common sense, yes, that's why he did so. But unless it is explicitly described and written as such, we can only make assumptions. Well, fortunately, providently, in the Septuagint, we are given the reason why he reached his hand to the ark of Elohim, in order to keep it steady, to prevent it from falling. Verse 7, rather. An addition of for his error, that's why he was smote, versus an omission in the Septuagint talking about how he died by the ark of Adonai before Elohim. So he was in the presence of Elohim. But there were also rules describing the proper way to carry the ark, not to be touched, but to be carried on staves, and ideally on the shoulders of 4 strong men, or 4 strong men, leave it at that. And then as a result of this event, this incident, what happened in verse 8? The king David was dispirited. He had his spirits lowered. We could even say in our modern day, depressed. He was down. And the Masoretic, he wasn't down. He was displeased. He was disappointed. He was not satisfied. He was not. Let's just look at the exact wording, or the alternative definitions provided. It says here, to be hot, furious, angry. He was angry. He was angry with Elohim. That is not what happened. He was not angry with Elohim. He was dispirited. He was sad. Reasonably so. He was depressed, possibly. And then it talks about the name of the place where this occurred. David called it the breach of Uzzah, or in the Hebrew, Perez Uzzah. Verse 11, there's an omission of, and all his possessions. So not only did Obed Edom, not only was he blessed and all his household, but including his possessions. Did this mean the objects in his possession, or did this mean those who he possessed, not demonically possessed, I mean who he owned, handmaids, servants, children, cattle, whatever it be? Those are 2 different understandings. So Adonai blessed those possessions of his those that belong to him, whether they are inanimate objects or living beings. It's hard to say. Significant difference. 7 bands. This is verse 11. Or is it verse 11? I don't seem to find it here. Okay, that's verse 13. Made a typo here. So a significant difference in verse 13, talking about 7 bands or 7 groups were bearing the ark, or the 7 individuals. In any case, 7 bands, perhaps groups. And then we have 6 paces in the Masoretic. So they only took 6 steps, talking about distance, and then they decided to stop. Well, that's not what happened in the Septuagint. They kept going, and the 7, actually not 6, but 7 bands accompanied David. So these groups, you can see that David did not take his chances with the ark this time. He didn't want a repeat of what happened with Perez, or with Uzzah, I should say. Verse 14, we have a huge difference. It's actually, I think it's our feud. Hold on, let me reset my tongue here. This is our first huge difference in all the book of 2 Samuel. And it talks about how David sounded with well-tuned instruments before Adonai. And David was clothed, notice with what he was clothed. He was covered with a fine, long robe. So he is adequately covered with a fine, long robe. And the Masoretic describes, not only was David not playing instruments, because David was, in the Septuagint, playing instruments. He is very skilled in this. In the Masoretic, he's not playing instruments. He's only dancing with all his might. And David was girded with what? A linen ephod. That's it. Nothing else. Okay, an ephod is just the breastplate. So it seems like he was naked. That is a huge difference. Not only was he not dancing. He was just playing the instruments in this verse. And he was clothed modestly, I would say, in this verse. Verse 16, a big difference. Talks about David, again, playing and dancing before Adonai. So he's playing instruments versus he's leaping and dancing, no instruments. Okay, so that's important because David is one who can play instruments and dance at the same time, not just dance without doing anything else. Okay, that's verse 16. Verse 19, there's an omission of the geographic Israel. So David distributed to all the people of Israel from Dan to Beersheba. So this is geographic Israel, not just those who are Israelites that were immediately in the vicinity, that were present in that immediate surrounding, but all over Israel geographically. What did he give them? Well, a big difference here as well. He also gave them a joint of meat versus a good piece of flesh. What is a joint of meat? Well, one possibility is it is a leg of lamb. And it's good to know that a single leg of lamb, American lamb in this case, can weigh up to 15 pounds or so, with enough meat to feed over a dozen. So that seems to be enough meat for a family. He's not giving, one chicken drumstick. It's not enough to feed one person, but a whole family. That's my understanding of this. As well, the cake from the frying pan is a big difference because it's a dessert. What is a flagon of wine? That's not a dessert. That is a large container of wine. However, when you look at the original Hebrew, this word ashisha can be translated as a raisin cake, just to be fair, but it is not translated as such. Okay. And then verse 20, it says here dancers or dancers versus vain fellows. Okay, vain fellows. Rake is the word. So that is how Michal is describing David, that he's empty. He's one of those empty fellows, or shallow, you could say. And he wantonly uncovered himself. That's how she describes him. So he is deliberately or lustfully or being sexually unrestrained, according to her judgment. In the Masoretic, he shamelessly uncovers himself. Perhaps he did, but he was wearing a full-length robe. But in her eyes, he was, if not physically uncovering himself, but showing a side of himself which a king, in her opinion, should not show. A king should behave in a certain way, according to her, not dancing in this way. And to her, it's a king who is debasing himself, lowering himself, and that should not be done, in her opinion, that a king should behave. It's not fitting for a king to behave in such a way, to appear that way in front of the people, according to Michal. Okay, so how does David react to this judgment? David said to Michal, I will dance before Adonai. End of story. I'm going to dance. I want to dance for Adonai. I'm going to do it. He spoke with authority, and he did it not for anyone else's pleasure. No human being's pleasure, but only to worship Adonai. That's the purpose. In the Masoretic, it is not expressed that way. He just says, it was before Adonai. Can you blame me? He sounds less confident. He sounds like he's trying to give excuses and confessing in a way that he's wrong and she's right. Okay, well, I did it, but it was before Yah. Can you blame me? That's kind of the way it comes across, in my opinion, anyway, in my reading. And then it says here, I will play. David saying, I will play and dance. This was omitted. So he will play and dance. Do both at the same time. Verse 22, a big difference. I will again uncover myself thus. So David is bringing the point home. I'm going to do this again. Verses, I will be yet more vile than this. So I'm going to be more evil. I'm going to be more inappropriate. What's the exact? To make light. So he sounds disrespectful in the Masoretic, but we can see how he knows his place. He knows why he did what he did. He knows that in her eyes it's evil, but in the eyes of Adonai, there's nothing wrong with it. I will be vile in your eyes. This is another big difference. I will be despised in your eyes. And with the maidservants by whom you said that I was not had in honor. So even the maidservants who you think did not esteem me, okay, go ahead. So be it. I'll be vile in your eyes and their eyes. What does the Masoretic say? It's a wildly big difference. It says, and I will be base in whose sight? In my own sight. So David is hating himself? Is that what is happening? I will be base in my own sight. So he's going to hate himself. He's not going to respect himself. He's going to be depressed in his own sight. He's going to be lowered in his own sight. No, he doesn't have a low opinion of himself. He doesn't have low self-esteem. He doesn't have a abnormal opinion of himself. How do they call it? Like a body image disturbance. He doesn't have a disconnect between how he sees himself and how Adonai sees himself. But let's just finish the sentence here. It says, I will be base and will be base in mine own sight, and of the maidservants which you have spoken of them shall I be had in honor. Okay, so he's basically saying, okay, you're going to hate me, but the ladies are going to love me. That's what he's saying in the Masoretic. But no, he's consistent in the Septuagint saying, okay, you think I was vile in your eyes? Well, I'm going to continue to do this. And even the maidservants, I'll be vile in their eyes too. So be it. That's the way it's going to be. So that's all for this chapter. There are quite a number of big differences and huge differences in this narrative. So thank you very much for your time. Till next time, I bid you all Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, Eirini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum, peace be unto you, and Maranatha.